Jews the world over will celebrate Passover later this week, complete with recipes passed down for generations. Lee Cowan has a tale of survival that's a blessing indeed.
Amidst the rich culinary landscape of New Orleans, you find a restaurant named Saba, which means grandfather in Hebrew. Its owner, Israeli chef Alon Shaya, has been winning awards for his modern Middle Eastern cuisine.
How's everything tasting so far, guys?
Which is a bit odd, perhaps, given that when he first emigrated from Israel at the age of 4, his roots were something he'd hoped to erase.
I spent so much of my life trying to hide my Israeli identity.
How come?
You know, at the age of 4 and 5 years old, the last thing you want to do is talk to them about this chickpea fritter that you're bringing to school when they're eating tater tots.
In culinary school, instead of hummus and pita, Shaya went full Italian. Pastas, charcuterie, and pizzas were his passions, until that is in his mid-30s, when, on a trip back to Israel, the dishes of his youth whispered anew.
I realized that I was really missing out on a part of who I was, and I started cooking Israeli food again and felt like I really began understanding what my identity was as a chef. So this is cholent. It's a stew that's typically made on Shabbat.
Ever since.
Sometimes they'll put wheat in a cholent, but this one doesn't have any, so it is kosher for Passover.
He's been marinating in Israeli ingredients and their history, which one day brought him here to perhaps an unlikely place for a chef, the archives of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum.
I was just blown away by how during one of the most horrible moments in someone's life that they could turn to food and that food would have that power.
He was both heartened and disturbed to learn that during the Holocaust, those forced into Jewish ghettos and concentration camps would write down family recipes, not to cook, but to remember.
Because it reminded you of home?
It reminded of pleasure in this lousy place where you were not a human.
Steven Fenves was 13 when his train arrived at Auschwitz in 1944. All the tangible evidence of his life before had been ripped away, or so he thought.
How fragile is it?
The text block is actually pretty sturdy.
To his surprise, after he and his sister were liberated from Auschwitz, this appeared.
Fenves?
His mother's recipe book.
Fenves Estera. My sister has to sign things.
Oh, your sister signed it.
When Shaya discovered it in the basement of the Holocaust Museum's collections, he had one big question.
So you mean that I could actually talk to the person who remembers eating this food? And they said, yeah, well, maybe we can put you guys in touch.
How that book survived is just one of those stories. The Fenves family lived an upper-middle-class life in the former Yugoslavia. They employed a maid, a chauffeur, a governess, and a cook named Marish.
Big woman, very thick Hungarian accent.
On the day looters stormed into the Fenves home as they were being led off, presumably to the gas chambers, Marish, who wasn't Jewish, raced in to save the family cookbook, for reasons Steven still doesn't totally understand.
I think it's just sense of loyalty and sense of love of the family.
Pretty brave thing to do.
Very brave thing to do.
What was the risk to her?
Everything was punishable by death. That's my mother.
Such a beautiful picture.
When Alon Shaya heard that story, he was so moved that he set about recreating the taste of Steven's childhood.
The recipes in this book aren't written like recipes you would see in a cookbook today.
So it's not like a half a teaspoon of this?
No. Like imagine your grandmother teaching you how to make a dish, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Essentially no heat setting instructions because this was all done on a cast iron stove.
And I don't have that setting on my stove.
There were potato circles, a walnut cream cake, and a dish that looks an awful lot like a fish stick, but isn't.
He began translating the recipes from Hungarian to English, and I began cooking the food and shipping the food to him to taste for the first time in over 70 years.
Would you like some mustard?
Yeah, just a tiny bit.
Steven's whole family got involved.
Yep,
In the process,
that's the real thing.
Fenves rediscovered a painful, personal connection to his story that he says had gotten lost over the years.
It had become such a chore. I no longer broke into tears in my presentation. It just became so routine, so cold.
But somehow, Shaya's revival of his mother's cooking reminded him of all that was lost.
He, frankly speaking, he got me out of a major slump in my duty to speak as a volunteer survivor.
How did he get you out of your slump?
Made it new, made it interesting, and made it moving.
One of the first recipes that I wanted to make.
Together, these newfound friends now host donor dinners, where his mother's dishes are served and Steven speaks.
We were separated at Auschwitz.
So far, they've raised more than $300,000 for Holocaust conservation efforts.
The effect of it on me was very, very pronounced. Childhood food,
Right?
It seemed to have been something tangential that went by the way with lots of other things that went by the way. So that's it.
It survived pretty well, given all that it's been through.
Yeah.
And you.
Yeah, barely.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Passover is about the imperative to remember both the good and the bad. Alon Shaya offered that gift through food, and because of it,
9 out of 10 on that picture died in Auschwitz.
Steven Fenves has a renewed mission to tell the terrible tale that must be told.
That's a very sad picture to see.